In the last webinar, we discussed how important it is to match interventions to the challenging behavior. If you haven't watched the webinar, Goals of Function-Based Supports, please do so now. One way that we can determine the function of a challenging behavior, or the reason a child is engaging in a behavior, is by conducting a functional behavioral assessment. To begin, functional behavioral assessment, or FBA, should be conducted in collaboration with trained professionals. The purpose of this webinar is not to train you to conduct an FBA, but rather to better understand the purpose and process so you are prepared to collaborate with a teacher, school psychologist, or behavior therapist during the assessment. FBAs can be powerful tools to help address your child's challenging behaviors. FBAs do this by observing what situations or contexts lead to your child using challenging behavior and what results from your child's challenging behavior, or what changes in the environment following challenging behavior. FBAs use this information to identify why your child engages in challenging behavior and skills that can be taught to your child to replace the challenging behavior. The FBA process is extremely important because supports and strategies based on the function of your child's challenging behavior tend to be more effective. The purpose of the FBA is to determine two main things: when the challenging behavior is most likely to occur, and why the child is engaging in the challenging behavior, or the function of the behavior. To determine this, FBAs look at instances of challenging behavior considering the antecedents and the consequences. Antecedents are what occurs right before the challenging behavior. This is also known as the context in which the behavior occurs. Consequences are what happens right after the behavior occurs, or what the child gets from engaging in the challenging behavior. When an FBA is conducted, it is best to consider one behavior that is the primary challenging behavior. To do this, a professional might ask you to think about what challenging behavior you are most concerned about, or what behaviors are causing the most stress or disruptions to your family. For example, your child might sometimes refuse to follow directions, and also might bite others multiple times a day. In this case, the biting is likely the most concerning and stressful behavior, which you'd choose to focus on first. When conducting an FBA, you also might be asked to consider situations in which challenging behavior is most likely to occur. These situations are called the antecedents. You might notice, he always throws a tantrum when I wash dishes, or she never has challenging behavior at Grandma's house, or it always happens when we get ready to leave the house for daycare. In these cases, you have likely identified antecedents to your child's challenging behavior. You might also consider what your child gains, avoids, or delays by engaging in challenging behavior, and what typically follows instances of challenging behavior. These are also called the function of your child's challenging behaviors. Children often engage in challenging behavior to either obtain desired events or avoid undesirable events. You might notice, he sits in timeout after he hits, or sometimes I just give him what he wants so he stops, or when she throws a tantrum, I hug her to calm down. Here you might have identified some outcomes of your child's challenging behavior, or the consequences. You also might consider some appropriate behaviors or skills that the child could use instead of the challenging behavior in the future. These are potential replacement skills. You might think something like, I wish he would just use his words, or it would be great if he could share with his siblings, or I wish she could play by herself for a bit so I can clean. These are all potential skills that can be taught to your child to replace the challenging behavior. All decisions about functions are based on observations of your child's behavior, or data. ABC data can be gathered in order to gain more information about the challenging behavior. ABC stands for antecedent, or what happened before the behavior, behavior, or what the behavior looked like, and consequence, or what happened after the behavior. Remember when we talked about the principles of challenging behavior in the last webinar? Here's where they come in. The first principle of challenging behavior is that challenging behaviors occur in specific contexts. These are situations in which challenging behavior is most likely to occur, or will regularly occur. These are also the antecedents to behavior that we just discussed. Challenging behavior might occur during specific times of day, for example, after school when your child is tired. The behavior may occur in certain settings, with specific people, or during specific activities. For example, your child may always follow directions at home, but run away from you when you are at the grocery store. To understand the context in which the challenging behavior occurs, consider the antecedents to your child's behavior. Think about what happened right before the challenging behavior began. Perhaps the child was asked to do something, or a preferred activity ended, or maybe the child was not provided with attention.
Timely, let's put your shoes on. I said it's time to leave. Come put your shoes on. Okay, I'll just carry you out then. Let's go.
When you experience a situation like this, it may be difficult to think of the antecedent to the behavior. A behavior occurring will clue you in to think about what happened right before the behavior that may have caused it. Let's watch the first part of this video again to see if we can determine the antecedent to the behavior.
It's time to leave. Let's put your shoes on.
In this example, the antecedent, or what happens right before the challenging behavior, is Mom telling Eli that it is time to leave and that he needs to put on his shoes. Under A for antecedent, let's put Mom says it's time to leave and put on shoes. The second principle of challenging behavior is that challenging behaviors are used to communicate wants or needs when children do not know other ways to request these. Although the behavior may not look like communication, what the child knows is that when he or she engages in this behavior, something desirable happens. To fully understand the behavior, next determine what the behavior looks like. When an instance of challenging behavior occurs, think about what exactly the behavior was. You might consider taking notes on the severity of the behavior on a scale of 1 to 5, or including notes on the people who were present during the challenging behavior.
I said it's time to leave. Come put your shoes on.
Here we saw elopement, or leaving an area without permission, noncompliance, or not completing a task they were told to do, and whining. For the purposes of this webinar, we are showing different children with different examples. When taking data on your children, you should define a specific behavior and take data on one behavior at a time. Under B for behavior, let's put elopement, noncompliance, and whining. The third principle of challenging behavior is that challenging behaviors are effective. Challenging behaviors are used over time because they work for the child to get what they want, either obtaining something they want or avoiding something they don't want. Without fully understanding the function of the behavior, it is easy for caregivers to accidentally reinforce challenging behavior by allowing the child to gain or avoid what they want. Reinforce is a term we use to indicate how likely the behavior is to occur again in the future. So although your intent may not be to reward the behavior, you may still be accidentally reinforcing it by increasing the chance your child will try that behavior again in a similar context to gain or avoid something. The final step in understanding the function of challenging behavior is understanding the consequences that maintain the challenging behavior. You might consider what happened right when the behavior ended, or what stopped the challenging behavior. Perhaps the child received attention in the form of a reprimand, or they were provided a favorite snack, or they did not have to do what they were told to.
Okay, I'll just carry you out then. Let's go.
When Eli engages in challenging behavior, Mom picks him up and he doesn't have to put on his shoes. Under C for consequence, let's put Eli doesn't have to put on shoes. You can see in this example that Mom was trying to not reward the behavior, but by not having Eli put on his shoes, she accidentally allowed him to avoid the task that she asked him to complete, which reinforced the eloping, non-compliance, and whining. In a similar situation, Eli is now more likely to engage in these behaviors rather than put on his shoes. You can collect ABC data without a data collection form by writing down the antecedents, behaviors, and consequences as they occur. However, it might be easier for you to use a form that reminds you what you are looking for. You can download and print this ABC data collection form from our website. You can use this form or another form the professionals you are working with use to record instances of challenging behavior. Once you have collected at least 5 instances of ABC data, a professional should look to see if there are any patterns. For example, she may notice that most behavior occurs after the iPad is taken away and ends when the iPad is returned. Hypothesis statements are summary statements that explain what you know about the challenging behavior. Hypothesis statements usually combine your ABC data to fully explain the challenging behavior, using all of the principles of challenging behavior. Hypothesis statements can take the form of, when this happens, the child engages in this behavior, and as a result, this happens. If we were to create a hypothesis statement based on Eli's ABC data, it would be, when a demand is presented, Eli engages in elopement and noncompliance, and as a result does not have to comply with the presented demand. Having a hypothesis statement will help when developing a behavior support plan for your child. In this webinar, we discussed the goals of functional behavioral assessments, principles of challenging behavior and how they relate to data collection, taking ABC data on instances of challenging behavior, and developing hypothesis statements. In the next webinar, we will discuss using ABC data to develop hypothesis statements. Here is a list of other helpful webinars that you can find on this site. We recommend that you watch these webinars to gain the best understanding of the behavior change process.